So let's look at some of the prerequisites that we'll need in order to develop an iOS application. Well, the first one that you're going to need is a Mac. Well, not that kind of a Mac, this kind of a Mac. There's a large variety of Macs that you can choose from. Basically, the Xcode tooling runs on a Mac. It doesn't run on Windows or any other platform. So you can use a MacBook, a MacBook Air, a desktop Mac, or a Mac Mini. Whatever it is, it has to be a Mac, and it has to be an Intel architecture Mac. It can't be a PowerPC based Mac. The next thing you'll need is either an iPhone or you can use a simulator. So simulator comes bundled with the Xcode development environment, and that's a choice that you could use instead of using a real device. But if you're doing something like location services or something more complicated, you're going to want probably a device. For example, I have a pacemaker application that charts your speed outside when you're running. Kind of need a device to test that and make sure it's actually working. In fact, you can't actually send simulator location data at this point. But basically, you're going to need some kind of device to run on, and at some point, you're going to need to actually have a real device to try it out because a simulator doesn't perfectly simulate everything. And then finally, you're going to need Xcode. And this actually, in the newest version, does not come automatically. I'll talk about some ways that you can get Xcode, but basically you're going to need the ID to do the development in. So here's some tips for developing on a budget. I know that if you've come from a .NET background, you might not even have a Mac, and you might not really want to put in this huge investment of money just so you can play around with an iOS application, especially if you're not sure if you're going to try and really build one all the way out. So here's some tips that I have used and recommended in order to bring down that total cost. Now, unfortunately, the biggest cost is still going to be getting a Mac, and there's really not a good way around that. But the best way to reduce that cost is to go with something like a MacBook Air, which is actually the choice that I chose. And I think I got mine for under $1,000. Or you can do a Mac Mini, which is about around $600, I think, of this time at the lowest cost one. And either of these options is fine. You don't really have to worry about the power. Some people were concerned, if I get a MacBook Air, will it have enough power to do iPhone development? It'll have plenty of power, and it usually have plenty of hard drive space for what you're going to do. So it might not be as fast as a MacBook Pro, but it should certainly have the power. The other thing you can do is normally I told you about getting Xcode that you could there's a couple ways to get it. The newest version of Xcode is not actually free. You can get it for free if you are part of the Apple Developer Program, but that's we talked in the first module it's going to cost you per year almost $100 a year. But you can actually just buy Xcode for $5 from the App Store. So that's really not that bad of an investment. If you don't know if you want to sign up for a year of the Apple Developer Program, that can save you a little bit of money right there. And then you can always start with a simulator. You don't need to get an iPhone right away or an iPad. You can basically use a simulator, develop your app, and then you can get to a point where you want to try it on a real device and then go ahead and make that investment. So these are just some tips if you want to get in. Using these tips, you can probably get developing an iPhone application for under $1,000. Another thing you can do is buy a used MacBook or Mac Mini, and that can even reduce the cost some more.